Okay, so here we go. Dear Ajahm, I have benefited greatly listening to Dhamma talks downloadable from Dhammaloka website and the internet. Thank you all who made this possible, and keep up the good work. Okay, that's very, very nice. 2, I have taken some scenery pictures of Jhana Grove and Bodhinana Monastery. Is it okay to share these on social media with friends? Sure, you can. No problems at all. Actually, just people, no worries. Just go for it. That was very, very easy one. Huh? Okay. Dear Ajahm, could you please talk about the 5 khandhas a bit more? I was trying to reflect on them today, but could only recall 4 of the 5. Okay. So the 5 khandha, the word khandha means something like a accumulation of something, right? That's why it's called an aggregate, because it's an accumulation of something. So the 5 khandhas are the kind of 5 aspects of a being, any kind of being, human being, animal, any being in any realm, essentially, are made up of these khandhas, and they are aspects of the personality. And the point about these khandhas is that they are the sort of aspects where we tend to see a sense of self, where we tend to feel a sense of self. So this is where like the problem arises, right? Because we have a sense of self in regard to these things. That is like the delusion in Buddhism. So these are the prominent areas where the sense of self tends to grasp fasten onto. And these 5 things are, the first is the rupa khandha. And rupa is form. So it includes things like the body, physical body, but it can include also form of a more refined kind. For example, there is form that you have if you get reborn as a deva, as a kind of in a higher realm. It's much more refined than this physical body, but it's still form, right? So not just physical body. And there's also kind of visual form, what we see through the eyes is also called form. But essentially it comes down, as a human being, it comes down very much to the physical body. You regard that in some way as yours, mine, me, I am this. The second khandha is the khandha of, often translated as feeling. It's Vedana. Vedana in Pali. And Vedana is that tone of experience that we have. And usually the tone of experience is either pleasant, unpleasant, or it can also be neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So it's not feeling in the sense of emotion, but it's feeling in the sense of the tone of experience. And that is one of the most important things in human life, the things that drives the craving and the desire, right? The tone. Once you feel, once you acknowledge that feelings exist, that it's either positive or negative, and straight away, that is where craving comes from. You want the good stuff, you don't want the bad stuff, right? So craving to push away the bad things and then to attach to the good things. This is one of the most, that's why feeling is probably one of the most, is a very important part of these khandhas, because that is what drives us forward, drives us around to crave and then to attach to things, and then through that we create a new existence also in the future, in future lives. And this drives the whole cycle of rebirth, and then therefore also in the end suffering itself. So that's khandha. Then there's perception, and perception is the thing that helps us to make sense of the world, right? We perceive things. You perceive colors, you perceive forms, you perceive concepts. You have ideas of who is your friend, who is your enemy, your nationality, who you are. All of these things are perceptions. It's like ideas about the world, or ways to distinguish one thing from something else, right? That's what perception is about. Without perception, everything would just be a big soup, and it wouldn't be able to kind of distinguish anything from anything else. It's interesting. I don't know if sometimes you read about these people who have been blind or have been deaf since birth, right? And then during their lifetime, somebody invents a cure for that kind of blindness they had. So when they cure them, then maybe they're adults already. They have been completely blind for 30 years, and then when they cure them, because the neurons in the brain are pretty fixed at that stage, there isn't much flexibility. There isn't that much flexibility anymore. Once they gain sight, they can't see properly. All they see is this soup, right? They see all this stuff, but they can't really distinguish what's going on. So, and that is the kind of, this is one aspect of perception, is ability to actually see. You can see the bricks and the walls and the windows, and you see colors and you see things apart. So this is part of the very obviously very important part to be able to function in the world. So that's perception, and perception, it relates to all the six senses, right? We're talking about six senses in Buddhism. Sight, hearing, tasting, smelling, and physical contact with the body, and then the mind is a sixth sense. It's possible to give up the five external senses and still be conscious. So there's six senses in Buddhism. So feeling and perception relate to all of those six senses. And then you have volition. This is sankhara. Volition is the will, the doer, the things that drives things inside of us. Whenever you make a decision in life, whenever there's craving, whenever activity is going on, that's the will, the volition inside. And this is another important sankhara, because we often tend to identify with that, right? I am the doer, I am the one in the world who goes out and sort things out, and I'm the one who acts. People identify with the sankhara, and they think of themselves as the actor in the world, the one who does. And the more you identify with the sankhara, the chaitana, the will, the volition, the more difficult it is to be peaceful in meditation, right? If you are the will, if you are the doer inside, then as soon as you become peaceful, there's something which wants to do, that the will feels subdued, it feels threatened. So then it manifests in different ways. It manifests in thinking, for example, right? You're still doing, you're planning for the future or whatever, or thinking about the past. And if your identity with that will is very strong, that's one of the reasons why it can be difficult to settle down and not think in meditation. Even though you try very hard, because of that identity is very hard. And the last one is consciousness. And consciousness is basically just the ability to be aware, right? You are aware of the world, you know what's going on, and you are aware through the six senses, the six types of consciousness, according to the way the Buddha analyzed it. And these six are exclusive to each other. They are independent of each other. They operate completely differently. Six types of consciousness, six types of awareness. So these are the khandhas, and the purpose of these khandhas is to think, this is where my sense of self resides. It resides somewhere in these five khandhas. This is where it fastens to. So what we do, one of the most important things in Buddhism, is to then observe the five khandhas and to see these khandhas, how they are impermanent, right? They're always changing. There's no stability there. And because they are impermanent, if you try to attach to them, you will suffer, because they will change. So these things which are impermanent, they are suffering. And because they are suffering and impermanent, they cannot be considered as a self in any kind of reasonable sense. So in practice, what does this mean? And what it means, for example, if you sit down in meditation, right, and your body starts to disappear, that is the rupa khandha starting to disappear. The body is gone, right? When the senses start to disappear, this is not relating directly to the khandhas, but the senses is another thing which starts to disappear as meditation progresses. As the mind becomes more peaceful, the will starts to disappear. This is another part of the khandha disappearing. So you're actually seeing, when you sit and meditate, you become peaceful. What you're seeing quite directly is the five khandhas disappearing inside of you, disappearing from your consciousness, disappearing from your awareness. And this is how you can start to understand why they are impermanent. They can only disappear if they are impermanent. So if you go into a deep state of samadhi where the body disappears absolutely, and the five senses disappear absolutely, and you become completely still, then that is where deep insight becomes possible, because you see the absolute impermanence of these phenomena. They can completely and utterly disappear. It means they are impermanent. They can't be you. You can't really, they are just coming and going, basically, according to causes and conditions. So that is where the really deep insights can occur, when these things start to disappear in this way. So this is how how we use the khandhas as a way of gaining insight, essentially. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Okay, so dear Ajahn, we love to listen to your excellent teachings again and again. Okay, it's very nice of you to say that. Please do a 9 retreat 3 times a year. May you attain Magapalism. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yes, thank you. It's very kind of you to say that. And I think once a year for now, and we'll see how the future develops. But okay. Venerable, what is the reason for the poor quality of life, full of poverty in Buddhist countries? Okay, whereas all those people who are not maintaining even 5 precepts are very happy and have good quality of life in the Western world. Okay, so are you sure that there are so many people in the Buddhist countries who keep the 5 precepts? Are you sure about that? Are you sure that they are any better than people in the Western world? It's easy to think that that's the case, right? That things are much better in the Asian countries. There's a famous story that Ajahn Brahm likes to tell, and this is the story of Ajahn Shah in the old days. And Northeast Thailand is a very, very, very Buddhist place. Everybody's Buddhist. Everybody goes to the monastery on the Uposatha days. And they come, and sometimes there's hundreds of people, right? And on one of these days, when there was hundreds of people in the monastery, Ajahn Shah asks the people there, lots and lots of people, how many of you keep the 5 precepts, right? There's a massive gathering, everybody's there, and something like 2 people raise their hands, right? This is in a Buddhist country, right? And then Ajahn Shah said, "You all dog poo," he was maybe using a bit more ruder word than that, but anyway, he said something to that effect, right? And this is the thing, if you are a very powerful teacher and people have a lot of confidence in you, you can be quite direct and people still are able to take it. This is what's going on there. So it's not the case. You cannot really say that. It's very hard to make that kind of comparison. It's not really comparable. So it is very hard to say. And there's many reasons why people get reborn in good circumstances, right? You can be a good person and you can have Christian beliefs. You can be an atheist and be a very, very good person. Lots of people out there who have no beliefs at all and who are very, very, very good people. So it is not often doesn't really correlate all that well with your kind of the religion that you're born with. Remember that the vast majority of people in the Buddhist countries, they are born as Buddhists, just like we in the West are born as Christian. I was born as a Christian. I was baptized as a child. I know nothing about Christianity. I'm not even remotely interested in Christianity. I've never been. It has never talked to me at all. It's never kind of worked for me in any particular way. And still, if you ask, I will be kind of labeled as a Christian. Right? Or at least I was until I became a Buddhist monk. Now it's going to be a little bit harder to label me as a Christian, but I certainly was before. And that's just how things work. We tend to be nominal Buddhist or nominal Christians in name only, but it doesn't go to the heart. And this is true of the vast majority of Buddhists in Buddhist countries. So you can't really make that kind of comparison here. So, yeah, and sometimes it is very inspiring. Sometimes you see people in our world. You can see the way I can see karma working out in our world is sometimes when you see people who are extremely wealthy but also extremely generous, right? You have people like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, 2 of the most wealthiest people in our world, and they're also extremely generous. Bill Gates, what he does now, he just spends his whole life apparently just doling out his money. That's all he does. He's given up his job at Microsoft pretty much. And now he started a foundation, and that purpose of that foundation is just to give out money. That's all he spends his life doing, being generous. That's quite inspiring, isn't it? You can see where the wealth comes from, because he obviously has a natural need almost to be generous and to be kind. And often it is like that. If you look carefully, people who are wealthy, at least sometimes, often perhaps, will also be generous people. Often it goes together here. But the idea of karma is very complex, and there's all kind of factors that come in, and often it's very difficult to actually judge and to say, well, this is because of this karma, and these kind of simplistic judgments don't usually work. Okay. Venerable, is it possible to be reborn as a tree in the human realm? Or do tree represent some other principle, i.e., Buddha enlightened under a tree and forest monk tradition? How do trees fit into the big picture, Metta? Okay, from a Buddhist point of view, it is not possible to be reborn as a tree. You cannot happen. So you can the sort of life that you can be reborn as is a sort of life that has consciousness, that has awareness, right? So it has to be some sort of consciousness there. And the Buddha basically he says that plants don't really have consciousness. So you can't really be reborn there. It would be interesting maybe if the scientific community can investigate this to see if there's any consciousness in trees. I think, to me, it looks like there is no consciousness there. So that is why you can't be reborn there. Remember, it's the consciousness that goes from life to life, right? So the life you move into also has to be conscious in one way or another. So how do trees fit into the big picture? I'm not sure if they really are part of the big picture. It's just that we have the Bodhi tree under which the Buddha was awakened. It's just a symbol of the Buddha. It's a symbol of awakening. That's what the Bodhi tree is. So you kind of, you go to the Bodhi tree, and what you're bowing down to is not a tree. What you're bowing down to is the symbolism again, right? When you bow down to a Buddha statue, it's not, Buddha statue is it's just a piece of metal, right? It's not all it is. But it represents the Buddha. So it represents the qualities of awakening. So that's what you're really bowing down to, those qualities. And that's beautiful, right? You're bowing down to wisdom, bowing down to kindness and compassion, bowing down to peace and all these things. That is a beautiful thing to do. And the same thing with the Bodhi tree. What you're bowing down to there is because it represents the Buddha and represents those qualities. Okay. Dear Bhante, could you please let us know who has obtained Nibbana in this life? Okay, have you already attained Nibbana? It is good to know so that I too can try to reach and attain the goal. Okay. I can't. This is the thing: is that what you have to do. This is the kind of thing you have to find out for yourself, right? Nobody can tell you these kind of things. So what you have to remember what are the qualities of a person who has attained Nibbana? Somebody who is enlightened. What qualities do they have? Right? So what does an arahant have? Well, the arahant has no greed. First of all, no greed, no anger, and no delusion. Right? So if somebody is fully awakened, they won't have those qualities. So this is one thing you can do. You can look at people and see how they behave. And if they behave in a pure way, that is when there is some chance that they actually may have gotten somewhere on the Buddhist path, right? And of course, if you have no greed, hatred, and delusion, what does it mean? It means that you are extremely generous. An arahant is someone who always is willing to give in all kind of situations, that never holds back unless it is impossible, right? Always giving of themselves. They never get angry. In fact, they're the exact opposite. They have endless compassion, endless concern for your welfare, right? They have no delusion. In other words, they're always peaceful. They're not restless or tired and this kind of things. They're always peaceful and always they always have a clarity of mind. They can see things as they actually are. When you ask them, they will often give you answers that are coming out of left field, right? They will say things, oh, wow, I never thought of that before. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Or straight away you reject it because it's just too much. Then afterwards you realize, actually, that was quite an interesting answer. So these are the kind of qualities you look for in somebody. So you have to look. You have to look for yourself. This is your job. If somebody tells you, one of the biggest problems in our world is too many people going around saying, oh, this person is that and that person is that, and then other people believe them, and you can get these groups of people who everybody just believes what everybody else says, and nobody really looks for themselves. But you have to look for yourself. That is the only way you can be certain about these things. Or you can't really be certain, but at least you can have some educated opinion about these things. And that actually is the other important point. You can never really be absolutely certain about these things. You can only have a relative certainty, one compared to another one. Sometimes people may be very pure because the meditation, just the samadhi, is very profound, right? And that samadhi will make you look like an extraordinary person, but you may not actually have attained the deep insights yet. So it is hard. What you can know is if somebody is not enlightened. If you see the anger, you see the greed, you see these things, you can be fairly certain that they have not attained Nibbana. And the other thing is to remember that attaining Nibbana is very profound, right? You ask me if I have attained Nibbana. Remember, it's a very profound thing, right? It's something extremely rare in this world. It's not just every kind of fellow who sits down and gives a talk who has attained Nibbana. It is very profound. So it is not, when you go out there, it is only the very special individuals who are likely to be anywhere close to Nibbana. Even people who are very virtuous and very kind in many ways may still be far away from these kind of attainments. But on the other hand, I have no doubt that there are people in the world to this day who have attained these things. Sometimes you meet people who have those qualities. You watch them, observe them, particularly you observe them over a long period of time. You see a consistency in conduct and all these kind of things. And after a while, you start to think, there's something special here, something not normal with certain people. And that is why you get a sense of confidence that there are such people. And not only that, we know that the Buddha's teachings are still available. We know that there are people practicing that Buddha's teaching. And as the Buddha said, if people practice this teaching, then there will be Aryas, there will be noble people, those people who are on the stages of awakening. They will still exist in the world. So I have no doubt, and that's really all you need to know, right? That the path is there, people are attaining it, but don't try to pin down the exact individuals. Sometimes you pin down, and because you haven't got enough wisdom to really understand, you place your faith in the wrong person. I know many people have done that, and then they get so disappointed and so distraught when that person disrobes or does something crazy afterwards. Just recently there was a monk in Thailand who many people had a lot of faith in. He was a Japanese monk, and he's not very well known in the West, but Ajahm Brahmali knew him very well because they were ordained, they were sitting next to each other in the line, almost ordained together. And he disrobed after being a monk for almost 40 years, right? And people were distraught. I met a lady in Melbourne who was a close disciple of his, and she was completely distraught, and she didn't know what to do with herself. It was, and this is what happens if you place too much faith in certain individuals. So yes, it's good, the main faith should be in Buddhism as a teaching that it works, that there is a general kind of consensus that there is progress to be made on this path. And it's okay to have a certain amount of confidence in certain people, but don't rely on that too much, because otherwise you might end up getting disappointed. Okay. Dear Ajahn, will you be kind enough to explain how we could meditate on the 32 parts of the body? Thank you. Okay, the idea of the 32 parts of the body is just to remember that you are more than appearances. The human physical body is much more than appearances. So you just investigate your body. Just remember what's actually in here, right? So you have lungs, you have heart, you have intestines down here, and all this kind of stuff. So you just remember what this body is made of. And the idea of this exercise, this is one of the Satipatthana exercises, is to reduce the desire for the body. And always do it with your own body. Your own body is the most important one. That's where you should do it. Sometimes you can just do a skeleton contemplation. Sometimes we have a skeleton outside in the monasteries in Thailand, have a skeleton hanging on the wall. But you're always carrying a skeleton around with you, right? The skeleton is right here. And sometimes you just sit down and you just think of yourself as a skeleton, right? You are a skeleton just sitting here right now. And the skeleton is a very big part, a very important part of the human body here. You can almost feel it. It's kind of heavy stuff inside. Your head is a very heavy thing because of all the bone, right? And so just imagine yourself as a skeleton here. So what is it like to be a skeleton? Is that attractive, or is it kind of it's just, you don't get very attracted to a skeleton, right? So you're just sitting there, you're a skeleton. And then you can start adding a few parts, right? But one of the interesting things is that, people say that beauty is only skin deep. And, if you peel the skin off the body is not very beautiful anymore. The skin is kind of essential for the body to appear beautiful. Take the skin off, whoa, it's kind of, I don't know if you've seen those exhibitions where they have the exhibitions. There's a famous German, Günther von Hagen or something, who had this body world exhibition that went around the world. And he basically did, he peeled all the skin off the bodies and then put them out for exhibition, right? These were dead people, obviously. So that's what you... that's what we look like, right? When you take the skin off, and that's what it's like. And that takes away a lot of the desire for the body. So just investigate the body like that. Have a picture, if you like, and think about the parts. Think of what you actually look like. The most attractive part of a human body often is the face, right? We look at people's faces. So take the skin off the face and then see what happens. Just as an exercise. These are the things you can do, right? You can play around. Because this is obviously a very important part of what the body is like. But don't be careful with these kind of contemplations, because often if you do it too much, you get too much of a negative reaction, and then you go out afterwards, you're really grumpy, and because you're really grumpy, you make a lot of bad karma through speech and through action afterwards, and then it is very counterproductive, right? So make sure that you do these things wisely and don't kind of do them in a stupid way. I don't really recommend people to do too much body contemplation like this. I think there are more important things to do. Do metta. Remember, the most important part to overcome in life is anger. Right? This is the real problem. This is the one which is bad. So work on that more than work on these other things. Anyway, that's the way it seems to me. Okay, dear Ajahm Brahmali, could you please speak a little about how the transmission of the suttas took place? We are reading Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation from the Pali. Who wrote down the Pali? When and where did this happen? In what script? How old are the oldest manuscript? Was it passed to China in written form? Are there places where the suttas are still recited orally? Okay. That's only half the question, so we'll start with that. So, okay, to the transmission of the suttas, the suttas originally were passed down orally. At the time of the Buddha, there was no writing in India, or if there was writing, it was very rudimentary and used only for very specialized purposes. But probably there was no writing at that time at all. So it was an oral transmission. And that is the reason when you read the suttas that they seem a bit strange, they seem quite repetitive, right? Repetitive in many different ways. You find the same sutta in different places. You find certain paragraphs repeated in one sutta, and it's exactly the same in the other suttas. Sometimes you see like strings of synonyms, one word after the other, meaning exactly the same thing. And that is because it was passed down in oral form. That's why it has a oral characteristic, the suttas, and you can feel that when you read them. You can actually see that in them. That is why the way they're written is quite different from how we write books these days. So what happened was that after a while, there are different recensions of the suttas, and what happened was that the Sangha, the group, the monks, etc., they started to spread out, right? Initially, they were in a fairly small part of the northeast of India, and they started to spread out all over India. And as they spread out, then, of course, it was difficult to keep the different transmissions together. They weren't really able to recite the suttas together anymore. And after a while, you started to get different interpretations of the suttas, different understandings of the suttas, because the Sangha became so spread out. And this is a large part of how the different schools of Buddhism started to originate. And the different schools of Buddhism have got nothing to do with Mahayana and Theravada, anything like that. These are the early schools of Buddhism, and they were known as Sarvastivada, for example, as one of the well-known schools of those days. Dharmaguptakas, Pugalavadins, Mahasangikas, these are some of the early schools. And then you had the Shtaviravada, which was possibly one of the forerunners of the Theravada, but not exactly the same. So what happened? It started to spread out physically into this India is a very large country. Keep that in mind. We're talking about some of the schools went to the very north of India, Kashmir, and of course a very important part of Buddhism went down to Sri Lanka, right? And these two schools, the one that went to Kashmir is known as the Sarvastivadins, and the one that went to Sri Lanka became the Theravadins. These are very important because the Theravadins became the ones who kept the Pali canon that we have now, whereas the Sarvastivadins, they became the ones who later on took their scriptures into China, and the Chinese scriptures we have now originated with the Sarvastivadins. Now these were Kashmir to Sri Lanka, it's about 3,000 kilometers, right? It's almost as far as across Australia. It's a massive distance. And in those days, there was obviously, you had to walk pretty much, right? If you wanted to go from one end to the other one, if you were lucky, you got an ox cart or something like that. And it was very long distances. So these tended to become separate traditions. They went their own ways, and they become slightly separate recensions. In Sri Lanka, the Pali tradition, what happened there was that after having been in Sri Lanka, this happened at the time of Ashoka, it's about 150 years perhaps after the Buddha passed away. That's when the transmission to Sri Lanka happened. And not so long after that, maybe 100 years or so after that, 200 years after that, they became worried that some of the books they had, because it was all memorized, right? So whereas some of the suttas that memorized were starting to disappear because they weren't able to memorize this massive volume of suttas anymore. And they thought, wow, it's disappearing. And by this time, an alphabet had been invented. They were starting to write. The writing was really invented around Ashoka's time. That's about 250 BC. And you have in India today, you have these famous Ashokan pillars, these pillars that still stand today with inscriptions from the time of Ashoka. That is roughly when the writing started at the time in India. And so they decided in Sri Lanka, where they also had the script also had gone, okay, we better write these things down before they disappear. And the language they used to write things down in, the language that was used for reciting the scripture, I should say at that time, was basically Pali language. And the Pali language is not really, it's a language which has certain features in common with certain languages in India. India is a very vast place, so the way they would speak in one area would be different from another area. So this Pali has its roots in the western part of India. But it's slightly artificial, because what happens is that when you have a body of scriptures, they are looked after in a certain way, and they tend to you tend to use a slightly artificial language to keep these suttas going. They tend to take on a form of their own because they're like separated out from the rest of the culture. So Pali is a slightly artificial language. It probably has never been spoken in India. It is slightly different from all the other ones. But it's also very close, right? It's a bit like American and Australian, right? I mean, they are separate in one way, but they're also very, very close in another way. Or British English and Australian English. There's slight differences, but very, very close together. It's a bit like that, maybe a little bit more, but roughly like that, because of geographical distances. So that is how Pali kind of came into being. It was created almost artificially because this was required to keep the suttas going. So you needed that stability of a language. So that is when they started to be written down. in what script. The script that was used was the Brahmi script. The Brahmi script was the same script as Ashoka used on the Ashokan pillars. And that Brahmi script that was used is the forerunner to the Indian scripts that you have today. Have you seen the Indian scripts? It's called the Devanagari. It's the one which it's like a line on top. It has all these kind of things coming on the bottom of the line. That's the Indian script. And if you go to Sri Lanka, if you go to Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, all of those countries, the script that you see in all those countries is derived from that Brahmi script as well. They're all part and parcel of the same script. Originally, they were all the same, and then they have developed over time in different directions. This all comes from Ashoka. It's Ashoka's fault that we have all these things. So this is when roughly it happened. Of course, the problem is that they were written down, but none of these manuscripts have survived. They were written down on palm leaves, so they would all rot, right? So they would then have to be written down, they would then copy it from one palm leaf to another one, and the old palm leaf would rot, and then it would stay on the new one. So I think the oldest manuscripts that have Pali, actual Pali on them, well, there are some. There's a little bit of Pali which is inscribed in the caves in Sri Lanka on rock, which goes back over 2,000 years. It's a little bit, but very, very small amounts. Then there are some manuscripts in Nepal, I think, which has Pali, which goes back to about the 7th or 8th century, something like that. But if you go to the north of India is much more conducive to keeping manuscripts, because there it is all desert, right? You go up to Afghanistan and Pakistan, there's just sand and desert up there. So it's very, very good for preserving things, very little humidity. So there, what they did, they took the old manuscripts they had and they sealed them up in urns and they dug them down in the desert. And these are still being found today in the deserts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and also the north of India. And some of those manuscripts go back to the 1st century. So they're basically 2,000 years old, right? Some of those manuscripts. And then when you take them out of the desert, you open up these urns, and these are so fragile, incredibly fragile. You have to be very careful how you touch them. And this is a whole science that is done by some of the big, I think the British Museum is one of the world experts in how to preserve these kind of things. So they open these up, and they spend years and decades sometimes, just trying to kind of pull these things apart so they can actually be read afterwards. And then when you read them, guess what you see? What do you think you see when you read these are ancient Buddhist manuscripts? What do you think you read? And what you read are pretty much the suttas as we have them now, right? And that is what is so powerful. That is what is so kind of amazing here. But then, of course, there is the other line of transmission which went through the Sarvastivans in Kashmir. And the Sarvastivans in Kashmir, then they were the forerunners to a lot of the suttas that were translated into Chinese. So if you go in the Chinese and you have the Madhyama Agama, which is the Sanskrit name for Majjhima Nikaya, that was translated from the Sarvastivadin scriptures into Chinese. Sangyukt Agama, the similar thing. So when you remember, I'm talking about these things separated around the time of Ashoka. That's almost 2,300 years ago, right? That's when they separated. One went into China, was translated into Chinese. The other one, the Theravada, went to Sri Lanka and was kept in Pali. Now, if you compare that Chinese to the Pali, then some of the suttas are still, to this day, almost verbatim exactly the same. Things like the jhana formula, for example, the way the jhanas are explained, and you compare the Chinese. I don't actually know Chinese, but I know some people who do, and they have shown that the formulas are almost word for word exactly the same after 2,300 years of separation. Isn't that astonishing? It's almost incomprehensible how they have been able to preserve these things so well. And that shows you that the Buddhist tradition was incredibly conservative and very, very careful in preserving these words of the Buddha, because they had obviously a lot of faith and confidence that this was an important thing to do. And that is basically how we can know today that what we have today is still, it is the word of the Buddha, right? It's not just something we make up because we have a lot of confidence and faith. It actually can be as far as I'm concerned, it can be shown that we have today basically the things that were spoken by the Buddha 2,500 years ago. So, was it passed to China in written form? Some of it was, some of it was not. The earliest parts were recited orally when it came to China. The Indian monks would go to China, and then they would go to China, and there would be like a translation team. So the Indian monk would often recite the Sanskrit or whatever, and then there would be a Chinese scribe. Then there would be a translator who obviously had to be bilingual, and then there was a scribe who would write it down in Chinese characters, right? That's usually how it worked. And then there would be a couple of more people who would then check the manuscript afterwards. So that's often how it was done. Translation teams. And this started, the very earliest translation into Chinese started in the 1st century AD. That's when they began this. And some of the agamas, the most important agamas are the same thing as the Nikayas. Most of those were translated in the 4th century. That's when the translations happened. Yeah, that's roughly how it happened. Are there places where the suttas are still recited orally? Yes, there is such a thing. At Bodhinyana Monastery, we recite the Patimokkha, the rules for monastics, every fortnight, and that is done from memory. But if you go to places like Burma, you find there are certain people who are able to recite the whole Pali canon by heart, right? Absolutely everything. And that is, it takes days, and it just at absolutely full speed. You just keep on reciting. And there are apparently people who can still do that. That's an absolutely astonishing undertaking. I don't know how that is possible to recite all those orally. I must admit, you must have an absolutely amazing memory to be able to do that. And that's obviously why it is so rare. But it is still done. Okay, so let's continue with the rest. I think I have answered most of those questions. So, okay, I read the Authenticity Project, very good, and I remember reading that Queen Mahamaya's dream about the elephant was a later addition, but the bit about Siddhartha walking at birth is from the EBTs. But maybe I'm remembering wrongly here. Yeah, I think the dream about the elephant is not even in that sutta. I don't think it's in that sutta, if I remember correctly. It's actually absent from the sutta altogether. But the thing about Siddhartha walking 7 steps, that certainly is in that sutta. Whether that makes it how authentic it is because of that is another question. And yeah, must admit I have my doubts about many of the things in that particular sutta. But anyway. Let's leave that for now. Some monks and nuns can remember past lives. Maybe there are monks who remember hearing the sutta as a long time ago. And this is the kind of thing we talk about as monks. This is a great way of kind of sorting out all the disagreements in the Buddhist world, right? Somebody remembers directly what they heard from the Buddha. Have you ever heard of any stories like this? Yes, sometimes you hear all kind of strange stories. I have to admit, you hear all kind of strange things. One very interesting story is the story of Dhammaruwan. Dhammaruwan has been here before, and he is quite a well-known Sri Lankan man who recited from a very young age. He started reciting suttas, and he recited things like the Satipatthana Sutta. And then when people started to listen, they realized there's something wrong with this Satipatthana Sutta. It isn't recited in the same way we're doing things now. There are some syllables that are slightly different. There's a different kind of accent to it. What's going on? And they looked at it, and they think that basically what he is reciting is the Satipatthana Sutta, the way it was done around 1,500 years ago. And he started doing that from a young child, right? This is one such example. There are also other examples of people claiming to have been around at the time of the Buddha. I don't know. It's very hard to know how much to trust these kind of things. And sometimes you just shrug your shoulders and basically say, I don't know. I'm uncertain about this. But there are people who make such claims. Whether that is trustworthy, I'm not sure about. Okay, that was a long answer, so let's go on. to the next one. Dear Ajahm, my lifetime partner has left me, and they have found someone better, in quotes. I don't really believe that, obviously, in quotation marks. I feel like half of me has died. This is the thing, right? This is exactly right. This is exactly what happens. We identify so much with that partnership. It becomes so much part of us that after a while, you're not really sure what is you and what is the relationship and how things are. This is precisely the problem, right? So that is, you have a chance of getting some insight now, what it means, what attachment means, basically what relationship means. So this must have been a good one, right? Otherwise, half of you wouldn't have died, presumably. I don't want anyone else. I want to spend the rest of my life with my partner. I want my partner back. Is there such a thing as destiny? Maybe my partner has lived many lifetimes with this person and is destined to be with this person again in this lifetime. If I follow the path of the Buddha and learn the Dhamma, be virtuous, do good, create good merit, donate to the temple, and do meditation and learn to have a good jhana, can I overcome their destiny, their many lifetimes of being together, their life, karma, and get my partner back? So that is why you have come to this retreat. Okay, now it is all coming together. Now I understand. That's why you're here, to make enough good karma and get your partner back. Now this is not what it's about, right? This is something to learn from. Instead of craving and trying to get your partner back, you should try to learn from this. This is life. Life is like this, right? This is what it's like. You're just experiencing existence as a human being. And this is why it's so painful. You can't avoid these kind of things. You can't just kind of trick life and then get your partner back again by doing kind of a tricky kind of Buddhist practices and get it back again. If you follow all these things and you do all these things, I assure you, at the end of all that, you don't want your partner back anymore, because you'll be so happy already, and you'll be so good. Your partner can do whatever they want. You're not interested anymore. So this is the wrong way to think. This is not the Buddhist way to think. Instead, this is your chance to learn. So remember that right now it is very difficult because half of you have been taken away. So it's a very hard time. So what you have to do, then you have to just think like Ajahn Brahm says that, okay, this too will pass, right? This too will end one day, and it's painful now. So you don't do anything stupid as a consequence of the loss that you had. But then gradually you also learn, remember this pain, remember what it feels like. If you go into a new relationship in the future, you are just asking for more of the same. That's basically what it is. And even if you get the same partner back, the partner comes back again, they might leave you again afterwards, right? And then again the same problem arises. At the very least, when you die, they will go. And you can have seen, often you can see these things, that when couples are very old and one of the couples, the wife dies, the husband dies, very soon afterwards the partner dies, the husband and the wife dies as well. Why? Because they can't live by themselves. They're just like you. They feel half of them have been taken away. They lose their will to live, and then they die as well soon afterwards. So this is very powerful. So this is your chance to learn about the dukkha, the suffering of human existence. This is what it's like to be human, right? This is what it means. You attach yourself so strongly that you feel like you're half dead when your partner goes. So this is, I hate to say this, but this is the wrong way, the wrong way of thinking. Please don't think like this. Try instead to learn something from what's happened. Can my doing good by virtue this lifetime overcome the destiny of many lifetimes? Is destiny already written for us? What will it be? If we follow Dhamma, can we change destiny? There is no destiny in Buddhism, right? Buddhism is not an idea of destiny. Buddhism, we're always creating our own future. And you're creating your own future now. You're creating your future by how you are in this moment. If you act to this moment, right here, right now, with kindness, with compassion, with peace, then you are creating a good future for yourself. If you are reacting to this moment with anger and desire and all these kind of things, you're creating a bad future for yourself. So try to overcome this desire for this person. Understand the relationship is finished. This is the nature of relationships. They must end. And now you are experiencing what that is like. So learn from this. This is the higher kind of wisdom that you can learn in this particular way. Don't try to do the impossible. It's not destiny. It is not, things can change. You never know what the future can bring. But instead of desperately trying to get your partner back and spending your rest of your life doing that, most likely it's going to be completely futile. Most likely, if they see how desperate you are, they will not want to be with you, right? Sometimes people feel that it's just too clingy, too kind of attached, and then they don't want to be with a person who's too clingy because it feels confined, right? So the best thing is just to learn to let go, just be kind, and take time. It's not going to happen easily. It takes time, but gradually the heart starts to release, and then it releases, and you feel after a while, you feel a sense of freedom, and you feel more independent. You feel a master of yourself. This is one of the most wonderful consequences of practicing the Buddhist path, is you become independent. You become free. You are no longer bound in all these relationships in the world, and your mind is more, you can go your own way. That's a beautiful thing, to have that sense of independence inside, not being bound down, held down by all these bondages and problems and knots that we tie ourselves in this life. Anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. I know it's painful, and this is just, but please remember to learn rather than, not learn from it. Dear Ajahm, are the 6 heavens above the human realm still inside this solar system? Why is it that one day in 4 great kings' realm is equivalent to 50 years in the human realm? How this time zone is so different from one realm to the next? Please explain in detail. Thank you, Ajahm. Okay. The thing is that these realms are kind of parallel realms, right? So they're probably right here, right now. If you could access kind of the heavenly realms, if you were able to close your eyes and kind of access those realms, you were able to see it straight away. It's like it's here. You just can't see it because you are trapped in the material realm, where these other beings are trapped in the higher realm. So it's not really, you can't really talk about it so much in terms of physical dimensions or anything like that, like within the same solar system. But the way that the Buddha talks about these things, that essentially he talks about the idea of world systems, right? There's a world system, and a world system is where there is a human realm, there's a realm of animals, there's a ghost realm, there's a realm of different heavenly realms, and they form like a world system. And maybe it is possible that is equivalent roughly perhaps to a solar system, or perhaps it's equivalent to the Earth or whatever, something like that. And then there are many such world systems. But the point is that they are parallel, right? So the way that the other realms see this solar system, if they see it, and they may very well see it, but they see it in a different way. They're seeing a different kind of aspect of that solar system. It's like a ghost, right? It says in the Sutta that a ghost is often able to eat. If you offer food to a ghost, they can eat that because that food, it kind of is visible both in the human realm and also in the ghost realm. So the ghost will then eat that part which is visible in the ghost realm, right? So it is like an overlap between these things, but they're also different. And that is why they can live, one day for these 4 great kings can be equivalent to 50 years because they live in a parallel existence. Their body is different. Their makeup, the way the physical body works is different, and that's why it can be so different for them. The way the world functions for them is probably different as well. So that is roughly how it works. I'm not sure if that makes any sense to you, but okay. Dear Ajahm, why Arahat Angulimala and Arahat Moggallana and some other powerful monks in the time of the Buddha decided to receive the consequence of the bad karma in the past, instead of just pass away into parinibbana. Those people who killed them have to spend at least an eon in the great hell. Well, it's not. I don't think they decided that. I think that they didn't have much choice, right? If you have done something bad in the past, sometimes you have to receive the results of that. But some of these stories are uncertain. The idea that the Arahat Mahamoggallana, that he received this very bad retribution from the bad karma, is only found not actually found in the suttas. It's found in the commentarial tradition, and whether that actually happened or not is very uncertain. Angulimala is a little bit more certain because there is some evidence in the suttas, but even with Angulimala, there's a lot of uncertainty. The stories are very different in the Chinese tradition compared to the Pali. So I'm not sure how much we can rely on these kind of things. But essentially, remember, a monk like that, an arahat, doesn't really decide that the bad karma is going to ripen from the past. Karma just ripens. That's why it does. And because they're arahats, they're able to deal with that ripening, and they can still kind of, do good service for the rest of the communities. And those people who kill them have to spend a long time in that. Yes, if somebody kills them, then that is true. They obviously have going to bear very long bad consequences of that. So I guess they would have done their best to avoid that. They would have done their very best to help stop people from doing that. But sometimes it just can't be done, right? Sometimes people will do what they will do regardless of what you are doing. And these arahats probably didn't know. Remember, an arahat is only perfected in the sense that they are spiritually perfected. They're perfected in the sense that they haven't got any defilements. They're not perfected in the sense that they know everything about the world, that they know all the karma, that they know who's going to kill them and how to avoid it and all these kind of things. They're not perfected in that sense. So if they were killed by somebody, they probably just didn't know it was going to happen. It just happens because that's part of life. Sometimes you get killed, right? Life is like that. And this will happen also, perhaps, with these arahats. Okay, dear Ajahn, I try my best to keep my precepts, especially the first precept, but the problem, my apartment has a lot of cockroaches. I have phobia with cockroaches. Instead killing them, I am using the vacuum cleaner. I search internet, cockroach will die because there's dust in the vacuum cleaner. Am I breaking my precept? My intention is not to kill them, but I know they will die there. Same with my mum, who uses vinegar instead, chemical to protect her plants from insects. Thank you. You are breaking a precept if you take the vacuum cleaner and you know that you're going to kill the cockroaches when they go in there. Then it is true. It isn't perhaps you know that they're going to die, right? So in a sense, there is a kind of an intention there to kill them because the knowledge is really enough. You know they're going to die. You're going to do that. Okay, that is really sufficient to be considered an intention to kill. So what you have to do is you have to try to find another way of catching the cockroaches and maybe releasing them somewhere, right? This is the ideal way. So trap them. I think there are cockroach traps available. Go on the internet, see if you can find the humane cockroach trap, one which doesn't kill them. I'm sure there are such things. It's amazing what is available in this world. And if you can find the humane cockroach trap, and then you can trap them, and then you can carry them outside and chuck them out outside instead. That is a better way of doing it if you can. So try to avoid these things. I mean, sometimes it is virtually impossible to avoid killing living beings. Sometimes it is required by the regulations of the government or whatever. And sometimes you just don't have any choice. Sometimes, and then if you do it kind of against your will, you don't really want to, but you have to do it because there's just no way out. Then the karma also is much less because if it had been possible, you wouldn't be doing it. And in this case here, It is not perhaps terribly bad karma because you don't really want to do it. Presumably you're trying to avoid it if you can. But try a little bit harder still. See if you can find a humane cockroach. See if you can find somebody who is not so much phobia, who can catch the cockroaches for you instead and throw them outside, right? Sometimes I have lots of insects coming into my little kuti in the forest, and some of those insects are quite dangerous. We have these spiders in Australia, which are much more dangerous than cockroaches, and if they bite you, you can get sick and all these things. But I catch them. I'm not really afraid of them. I just catch them, sometimes with a broom or sometimes with something else, and then I carry them off into the forest, and I release them in the forest. I never, ever have any real need to kill any insects, even though I often get quite a lot of them, and dangerous ones as well. So try your best and see what you can do. There's often there are ways and means to do these things. Okay, dear Ajahm Brahmali, I work with a lot of young people in their 20s who seem to be obsessed with their image and appearance, covering their bodies with tattoos and spending a lot on hairstyle and clothing. That's right, okay, yeah. It seems that their mobile phone has somehow become a life support system, and they have emotional distress if they're not looking at or holding it. That's very interesting, isn't it? A lot of the TV reality shows are based on becoming famous for, e.g., the so-called talent, or improving material possessions such as houses. At the same time, these young people tend to lack the real qualities in sustaining life and lack compassion and the ability to be silent and still. Do you think we are developing a generation less capable of spiritual development and progress? It's very hard to say. I mean, people are different, right? Okay, this is how many young people are, but there are also going to be exceptions, right? There are young people here on this retreat who obviously, they're still hanging in there. They're not going crazy, right? So there are always exceptions in this world. No, people are not all the same. So we're just generalizing here. And the general reality is that the average person, whether they're young or old or whoever they are, they're going to incline towards the pleasures of the world. And that's basically what they are. They're just inclining towards the pleasures. That's basically what it is. And this is the natural state of the human being. This is what we all want. But we just forget the limitations of those pleasures. We forget the dangers. And because we forget the dangers, we indulge in a stupid way. And then we reap the consequent suffering afterwards. But there will always be, I think, people who have the spiritual development and progress. And I think in our world there's lots of people who seek that, who understand that it needs something more. This kind of material, this obsession with doing lots of things all the time and having a high speed of life and always being online and always being available and checking your mobile phone every 10 seconds or whatever, it's not really, there comes a point when you start to question the validity of that. At least some people question that. And then those people will then, incline towards a spiritual lifestyle. Perhaps they will incline to monasticism, and they are the ones who will keep the Buddhist teaching going. The vast majority are never really going to practice the Buddhist path, let's face it, and that's okay. They don't have to do that. It's okay. We make the Buddhist teaching available to the world, and then there will be some people who take it up, and others won't, and that's fine. Let them do. People have to do what they have to do. You can't change that anyway. That's going to be true also in the future. So I wouldn't kind of worry too much about those things because they're just so uncertain. I know there are some people who are worried about this. Some neuroscientists who say that the brains of people are reconnecting in bad ways. That means that they are less capable of perhaps peace, and they are becoming more distracted and all these kind of things. Perhaps, maybe there's some truth to that. But I'm not enough of an expert to be able to say. Usually what happens in these things is that people tend to overreact and tend to become over-worried about these things. Then it turns out that perhaps it wasn't so bad after all. So I think it's very, very hard to say. And So I think there certainly will be enough people around, always, at least for a long time, to keep the Buddhist teaching available in the world. And that is perhaps the most important thing here. Dear Ajahn, what does it mean that Buddhism follows the Eightfold Path? Is it like referring to the 8 precepts? Is it the same as the Eightfold Path outlined by Patanjali in the yoga tradition? Now are you asking me beyond what I know? I don't know anything about Patanjali in the yoga tradition. I didn't even know that there was such an Eightfold Path in that tradition. What it means is that there are 8 factors. These are the things that I have been talking about a little bit, right, at the beginning here. I was saying that the gradual training and the Eightfold Path are basically the same things. So it's 8 kind of things, the 8 factors that we have to practice, and we have to practice them roughly in a certain sequence. And when we do that, then that path takes us to awakening eventually. This path always leads to awakening. And it is not referring to the 8 precepts. The 8 precepts is only a small part of that path, but it is integrated in that path. So what I recommend you is get a nice book on Buddhism. As I was saying the other day, there is this nice book called In the Buddha's Words, Translations by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. It's a very nice introduction, and there you can read about the Eightfold Path and all that sort of stuff in more detail. Then you have a nice book on your bookshelf, and you can refer to that whenever you need some information about Buddhism. Dear Ajahn, it is true when we get nice relationships, nice house, beautiful meal, after that we feel slight emptiness. But is it something wrong with me? Even I am doing a good thing, I feel happy only for a while, and then I feel slight emptiness too. Thank you, with metta. Okay, so I think often the kind of the default state sometimes, if you haven't done enough good karma and got enough good actions, the default can be like a slight emptiness feeling, right? So that kind of, you come back, there's nothing happening, nothing is going on, and you feel sort of empty inside. And the way to get away from that, the way to move away from that, is just to keep on doing what is right and what is good in the world. The more you do what is good and right, the more you're able to change your thinking, the more you're able to speak in the right way, the more you're able to act with kindness. Try to be kind to people, right? See if you can actually, as much as you possibly can, in all kinds of circumstances, whether they are strangers, whether they are friends, whatever they are, always move towards kindness. And the more you're able to do that, the more fulfilled you start to feel inside. The sense of emptiness starts to disappear, and you start to feel like you feel an automatic sense of happiness. And this is what we're trying to achieve on the Buddhist path. It's the idea that when you sit down to meditate, you just close your eyes, and then and the happiness comes back by itself because you have done so much goodness. You have such a pure heart already that the happiness is already there. That is the idea, right? But to do that, and for that to work, you have to really invest. You have to invest quite a lot of perseverance, of effort to investigate your life, to be honest about yourself. Where can I improve? Where can I change? And as you change and as you improve, there will be that shift happening. Sometimes it's very gradual. You have to be very patient, very persevering. Gradually there's a shift. And then you start. It's like the emptiness starts to disappear. And you start to feel like you're filled up. You feel complete. There's nothing lacking anymore. And that is where the emptiness, and you feel like a complete person. This is what happens when you go into very deep meditation. The deeper your meditation, the more fulfilled you feel as a person. This is what meditation is about, right? You feel fulfilled. Whereas people in the world, they run around never finding fulfillment. You find fulfillment just by sitting still. Okay. Okay, dear Ajahm Brahmali, a religious joke. Okay. Did you hear the one about the dyslexic, agnostic insomniac? Okay. He stayed awake all night wondering if there really is a dog. Okay. Okay, right. So he couldn't spell God properly, so that's why he was a dyslexic, agnostic insomniac. Okay, very good. So there you are. Did you get that one? So you can tell it to your Buddhist mates later on here. Okay. I'll put that aside. I'll give it to Ajahn Brahm so he can tell it. He's very good with telling jokes, so put that to one side. So you've done a good service. If you get a joke to Ajahn Brahm, that's considered a good service. As he will be make him very happy when he sees that. Okay, the last question for tonight. Dear Ajahn, if sensual pleasures has two aspects, all objects in the world and all desire, all mental objects, feeling, consciousness, volition, and perception, are those sensual pleasures? If yes, so how can we escape from all those things? And even arahats still have sensual pleasures. Thank you, with metta. Okay, so sensual pleasures, there's two aspects. And one is the objects of the sensual world, the things you see, the things you hear. And the other side is the desire inside of us. And inside of us is only that desire which is the sensuality inside of us. If you remove the desire for sensual objects, then that is no longer there. So whatever is left in the mind, if you take the desire out, whatever is left, whatever feelings are there, whatever perceptions you have, whatever volition you have, whatever consciousness you have, which is purified from that desire, that is not part of sensual pleasure. That is beyond the sensual pleasures. Right? Does that make sense? So this is how you get how there's still something left, even if you take the sensual pleasures away. There's also sensual pleasures a little bit more complicated than that, because sometimes you can think about sensual pleasures, right? You can even dream about it. You dream about these things. And then, of course, it's not really the objects of the five senses. It is the object in the mind. So the mind has kind of taken on the objects of the five senses for itself, and then you dream about these things. So that is also included. That is also has to be let go of. So that's when you do meditation practice and the senses start to shut down, and all you have left is just the breath. And then the breath disappears, and all you have left is kind of happiness and bliss. That is when you are moving away from sensual pleasures. There's a little bit left of perhaps tiny little bit, but you are moving much more into the realm of spiritual pleasure, the pleasure of meditation instead. Okay, so those are the questions for tonight. So please continue enjoying yourself, have a good time, and then we'll see you again tomorrow morning here.